Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Thank you very much, my fellow Americans. I am very proud to announce today that we have reached a deal to end the shutdown and reopen the federal government. As everyone knows, I have a very powerful alternative, but I didn't want to use it at this time. Hopefully it will be unnecessary. I want to thank all of the incredible federal workers and their amazing families who have shown such extraordinary devotion in the face of this recent hardship. You are fantastic people. You are incredible patriots. Many of you have suffered far greater than anyone but your families would know or understand. And not only did you not complain, but in many cases you encouraged me to keep going because you care so much about our country and about its border security. Again, I thank you. All Americans, I thank you. You are very, very special people. I am so proud that you are citizens of our country. When I say make America great again, it could never be done without you. Great people. In a short while, I will sign a bill to open our government for 3 weeks until February 15th. I will make sure that all employees receive their back pay very quickly or as soon as possible. It'll happen fast. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to put this proposal on the floor immediately. After 36 days of spirited debate and dialogue, I have seen and heard from enough Democrats and Republicans that they are willing to put partisanship aside, I think, and put the security of the American people first. I do believe they're going to do that. They have said they are for complete border security, and they have finally and fully acknowledged that having barriers, fencing, or walls, or whatever you want to call it, will be an important part of the solution. A bipartisan conference committee of House and Senate lawmakers and leaders will immediately begin reviewing the requests of our Homeland Security experts, and experts they are, and also law enforcement professionals who have worked with us so closely. We want to thank Border Patrol, ICE, and all law enforcement. Been incredible. Based on operational guidance from the experts in the field, they will put together a Homeland Security package for me to shortly sign into law. Over the next 21 days, I expect that both Democrats and Republicans will operate in good faith. This is an opportunity for all parties to work together for the benefit of our whole beautiful, wonderful nation. If we make a fair deal, the American people will be proud of their government for proving that we can put country before party. We can show all Americans and people all around the world that both political parties are united when it comes to protecting our country and protecting our people. Many disagree, but I really feel that working with Democrats and Republicans, we can make a truly great and secure deal happen for everyone. Walls should not be controversial. Our country has built 654 miles of barrier, over the last 15 years, and every career Border Patrol agent I have spoken with has told me that walls work. They do work. No matter where you go, they work. Israel built a wall, 99.9% successful. Won't be any different for us. They keep criminals out. They save good people from attempting a very dangerous journey from other countries, thousands of miles, because they think they have a glimmer of hope of coming through. With a wall, they don't have that hope. They keep drugs out, and they dramatically increase efficiency by allowing us to patrol far larger areas with far fewer people. It's just common sense. Walls work. That's why most of the Democrats in Congress have voted in the past for bills that include walls and physical barriers and very powerful fences. The walls we are building are not medieval walls. They are smart walls designed to meet the needs of frontline border agents and are operationally effective. These barriers are made of steel, have see-through visibility, which is very important, and are equipped with sensors, monitors, and cutting-edge technology, including state-of-the-art drones. We do not need 2,000 miles of concrete wall from sea to shiny sea. We never did. We never proposed that. We never wanted that, because we have barriers at the border where natural structures are as good as anything that we can build. They're already there. They've been there for millions of years. Our proposed structures will be in predetermined high-risk locations that have been specifically identified by the Border Patrol to stop illicit flows of people and drugs. No border security plan can ever work without a physical barrier. Just doesn't happen. At the same time, we need to increase drug detection technology and manpower to modernize our ports of entry, which are obsolete. The equipment's obsolete. They're old. They're tired. This is something we have all come to agree on and will allow for quicker and safer commerce. These critical investments will improve and facilitate legal trade and travel through our lawful ports of entry. Our plan also includes desperately needed humanitarian assistance for those being exploited and abused by coyotes, smugglers, and the dangerous journey north. The requests we have put before Congress are vital to ending the humanitarian and security crisis on our southern border. Absolutely vital. Will not work without it. This crisis threatens the safety of our country and thousands of American lives. Criminal cartels, narco-terrorists, transnational gangs like MS-13, and human traffickers are brazenly violating U.S. laws and terrorizing innocent communities. Human traffickers. The victims are women and children, maybe to a lesser extent, believe it or not, children. Women are tied up, they're bound, duct tape put around their faces, around their mouths. In many cases, they can't even breathe. They're put in the backs of cars or vans or trucks. They don't go through your port of entry. They make a right turn going very quickly. They go into the desert areas or whatever areas you can look at. And as soon as there's no protection, they make a left or a right into the United States of America. There's nobody to catch them. There's nobody to find them. They can't come through the port, because if they come through the port, people will see 4 women sitting in a van with tape around their face and around their mouth. Can't have that. And that problem, because of the internet, is the biggest problem. It's never been like this before that you can imagine. It's at the worst level, human trafficking, in the history of the world. This is not a United States problem. This is a world problem. But they come through areas where they have no protection, where they have no steel barriers, where they have no walls. And we can stop almost 100% of that. The profits reaped by these murderous organizations are used to fund their malign and destabilizing conduct throughout this hemisphere. Last year alone, ICE officers removed 10,000 known or suspected gang members like MS-13 and members as bad as them. Horrible people, tough, mean, sadistic. In the last 2 years, ICE officers arrested a total of 266,000 criminal aliens inside of the United States, including those charged or convicted of nearly 100,000 assaults, 30,000 sex crimes, and 4,000 homicides, or as you would call them, violent, vicious killings. Can be stopped. Vast quantities of lethal drugs, including meth, fentanyl, heroin, and cocaine, are smuggled across our southern border and into U.S. schools and communities. Drugs kill much more than 70,000 Americans a year and cost our society in excess of $700 billion. The sheer volume of illegal immigration has overwhelmed federal authorities and stretched our immigration system beyond the breaking point. Nearly 50 migrants a day are being referred for medical assistance. They're very, very sick, making this a health crisis as well. It's a very big health crisis. People have no idea how big it is unless you're there. Our backlog in the immigration courts is now far greater than the 800,000 cases that you've been hearing about over the last couple of years. Think of that, though. 800,000 cases because our laws are obsolete. So obsolete. They're the laughing stock all over the world. Our immigration laws, all over the world, they've been there for a long time, are the laughing stock all over the world. We do not have the necessary space or resources to detain, house, vet, screen, and safely process this tremendous influx of people. In short, we do not have control over who is entering our country, where they come from, who they are, why they are coming. The result for many years is a colossal danger to public safety. We're going to straighten it out. It's not hard. It's easy if given the resources. Last month was the third straight month in a row with 60,000 apprehensions on our southern border. Think of that. We apprehended 60,000 people. That's like a stadium full of people, a big stadium. There are many criminals being apprehended, but vast numbers are coming because our economy is so strong. We have the strongest economy now in the entire world. You see what's happening. We have nowhere left to house them and no way to promptly remove them. We can't get them out because our laws are so obsolete, so antiquated, and so bad. Without new resources from Congress, we will be forced to release these people into communities, something we don't want to do, called catch and release. You catch them, even if they're criminals, you then release them. And you can't release them from where they came. So they go into our country and end up in places you would least suspect. And we do as little releasing as possible, but they're coming by the hundreds of thousands. I have had 0 Democrat lawmakers volunteer to have them released into their districts or states, and I think they know that, and that's what we're going to be discussing over the next 3 weeks. The painful reality is that the tremendous economic and financial burdens of illegal immigration fall on the shoulders of low-income Americans, including millions of wonderful, patriotic, law-abiding immigrants who enrich our nation. As Commander-in-Chief, my highest priority is the defense of our great country. We cannot surrender operational control over the nation's borders to foreign cartels, traffickers, and smugglers. We want future Americans to come to our country legally and through a system based on merit. We need people to come to our country. We have great companies moving back into the United States. And we have the lowest employment and the best employment numbers that we've ever had. There are more people working today in the United States than have ever worked in our country. We need people to come in to help us on the farms and with all of these great companies that are moving back. Finally, they're moving back. People said it couldn't happen. It's happening. And we want them to enjoy the blessings of safety and liberty and the rule of law. We cannot protect and deliver these blessings without a strong and secure border. I believe that crime in this country can go down by a massive percentage if we have great security on our southern border. I believe drugs, large percentages of which come through the southern border, will be cut by a number that nobody will believe. So let me be very clear. We really have no choice but to build a powerful wall or steel barrier. If we don't get a fair deal from Congress, the government will either shut down on February 15th again, or I will use the powers afforded to me under the laws and the Constitution of the United States to address this emergency. We will have great security. And I want to thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Lester, forgive me, I'm just getting tuned in now.
I've continuously said I wouldn't let the Senate become a theater for show votes and messaging stunts from either side. We'd only vote on plans that stood an actual chance of being signed by the president and thus obviously becoming law. So I was glad to see today the president's announcement that he and our Democratic colleagues have reached an agreement that will immediately reopen the government while providing the room to negotiate a funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security. Further, negotiations on DHS will be prioritized over consideration of any other funding bills. So with cooperation, we can pass legislation opening the government and send the DHS appropriations bill to a conference with the House today. I'm glad the closed portions of the federal government will reopen and get back online. I'm glad that the dedicated men and women of the Coast Guard, law enforcement, the TSA, and all the other federal employees will not have to go longer without pay for their work and will receive their back pay. I know the pain that this episode has caused to many Kentuckians and to people all over our country. They deserve this resolution. So going forward, I hope our Democratic friends will stay true to the commitment they've stated constantly over the past weeks, that once the government was reopened, they'd be perfectly willing to negotiate in good faith on a full-year government funding that would include a significant investment in urgently needed border security measures, including physical barriers. After all, the only way the federal workers are going to have stability and certainty beyond the next 3 weeks, the only way our border is going to have real security, is if Democrats will stop playing partisan games and get serious about negotiating with the president on a long-term compromise. The days ahead will tell us whether our Democratic colleagues are actually serious about securing our nation, whether they actually mean what they say. So the president's called on the Senate to act on these proposals, and now that there's an agreement between the House, we can make that happen.
Madam President.
Democrat leader.
Madam President, the longest shutdown in American history will finally end today. The President has agreed to our request to open the government and then debate border security, which is great news for 800,000 federal workers and millions of Americans who depend on government services. I want to thank President Trump and Leader McConnell. As just outlined, we have agreed to pass a clean 3-week continuing resolution to reopen the government. Also, we will pass legislation in the Senate related to the Department of Homeland Security so the House and Senate can participate in a conference committee on that legislation. In the conference, Democrats and Republicans will have the opportunity to negotiate the details of the Homeland Security bill, which includes issues of border security, humanitarian aid, drug inspection technology, and many others. We expect the continuing resolution to clear the House and be signed by the President today. As soon as the President signs the legislation to open government, we in Congress will roll up our sleeves. I genuinely hope that this process can produce something that is good for the country and acceptable to both sides. We don't agree on some of the specifics of border security. Democrats are against the wall. But we agree on many things, such as the need for new technology and the need to strengthen security at our ports of entry. And that bodes well for coming to an eventual agreement. I believe there's good faith on both sides to reach an agreement, and we will work diligently to achieve one. And because we've set this up as a conference, Democrat and Republican leadership, House and Senate, will be involved, as will the appropriators from those committees. Most importantly, this agreement means that the government will reopen and 800,000 federal employees will finally get paid. After over a month of increasing desperation, our dedicated public servants will get the relief and the paychecks they are entitled to, including back pay. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank the federal workers who worked so selflessly this past month. They should never have to go through this again. We will do everything we can to make sure they won't have to. The past month has proven just how vital government services are to the American people, whether that's air traffic control, food safety inspections, the Coast Guard, national parks, and so many others. With this agreement, TSA, Border Patrol, FBI agents will all be paid again for protecting our country. Our airports will get back on track. We'll resume maintenance of our cherished national parks, and the IRS can issue tax refunds in a timely manner, all critical for the well-being of the American people. As Democrats have said all along, the solution to this impasse was to separate funding the government from our disagreements over border security. This agreement endorses that position. It reopens the government without preconditions and gives Democrats and Republicans an opportunity to discuss border security without holding hundreds of thousands of American workers hostage. Hopefully, it means a lesson has been learned. Shutting down government over a policy difference is self-defeating. It accomplishes nothing but pain and suffering for the country and the American people. That's a lesson we all must bear in mind when this next continuing resolution expires, and that will make its success more likely. We can never hold American workers hostage again. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, government shutdowns are never justified, and I have opposed every one of them. This shutdown, the longest in our nation's history, has caused real harm to 800,000 federal employees and their families. Just today, I heard from a federal employee in Belfast, Maine, who has worked for 32 years for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He has 2 children with type 1 diabetes, and with the soaring cost of insulin, he was beginning to worry about how he would be able to afford insulin for his children. He was concerned that a prolonged shutdown would have an adverse impact on his insurance coverage. The shutdown has also hurt Americans' access to federal agencies and threatened housing assistance for low-income families, our seniors, people with disabilities. It's harmed small businesses that have contracts with federal agencies for certain services, and yet were not getting paid, and thus their employees were at risk of being laid off. And that's why I voted twice this week to end the shutdown and reopen government. Although neither proposal received enough votes to pass, we saw glimmers of hope that have produced results. I would note that after the failed votes, a bipartisan group of 16 senators came to the floor, and each one of us indicated a willingness to compromise. And today, I am pleased that there is real progress. The President and Senate Republicans and Democrats have come together and agreed to reopen government until February 15th, while negotiations on border security issues continue. That is so important, Madam President, and as the presiding officer is chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security, I know she will be playing a key role in this area. But Madam President, let each of us on the Democratic side of the aisle, the Republican side of the aisle, and in the administration pledge that we will negotiate in good faith, that we will work to hammer out a compromise on border security so that we are not facing the same situation again on February 15th. I, for one, will keep working with my colleagues, with the White House, to ensure that hundreds of thousands of hardworking, patriotic public servants stay on the job. That this is not just a temporary reprieve that will allow back pay to be made to them as early as the beginning of next week, but rather that it will lead to a permanent solution so that we can reopen government beyond February 15th through the end of the fiscal year, that is until September 30th, and that in the future we can avoid ever resorting to the shutdown of government again. It is never good policy. So let us work together over this next 3 weeks, come up with a compromise on border security, and show the American people that we can govern effectively. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you. Madam President, obviously, this is a happy and positive day, not only for federal employees, but for the American people as we reopen the government. But we should also indicate there is something absolutely pathetic about what has happened. Let us not forget for a second that 5 weeks ago, the United States Senate unanimously, every Republican, every Democrat, voted for essentially the same legislation that will likely pass today. 5 weeks ago, we voted to keep the government open, and then President Trump, responding to Fox Television and other right-wing outlets, announced that he would shut down the government unless he got his wall. 5 weeks. Think of the suffering, the uncertainty, the pain that hundreds of thousands of federal workers have been forced to experience. Workers who have worried about whether they will be able to pay their mortgages, whether they're going to be able to feed their kids, whether they will be able to go to the doctor when they get sick, worried about what kind of damage has been done to their credit ratings. That is a result of Trump's shutdown. And, Madam President, if my ears heard correctly, and I think they did, Trump even today, just a few minutes ago, announced that he is prepared to shut down the government again unless he gets his way. And I think the time is long overdue for the American people to tell this president He is not a dictator. He is not a king. He is not the despotic ruler of Saudi Arabia. He is not his authoritarian friend, Vladimir Putin of Russia. He is the President of the United States, and he cannot and must not continue to threaten to shut down this government and hold hundreds of thousands of workers, federal workers, hostage. And Mr. President, while I am delighted that the government is going to be reopened and delighted that federal employees will get their back pay, I remain concerned by the over 1 million contract employees, often folks who work for low wages, who not only have lost pay, but at this point at least are not protected by any legislation to make sure that they get their back pay. And that, Mr. President, is something that I hope we can address. Mr. President, the truth is, despite what the President tells us, there is nobody in the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House who is not concerned about border security. Some of us believe that spending as a down payment $5.7 billion on a wall with many billions more to come is not an effective use of tax dollars when we talk about border security. There are better ways to do it, more cost-effective ways to do it. But there is no debate that border security is an important issue. But, Mr. President, one of the things that concerns me very much, and I say this to you, who is chairman of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, is that border security and a wall is not the only issue facing the American people. There are 30 million Americans who have no health insurance, many more who are underinsured. We pay by far the highest cost for prescription drugs of any people on the face of the earth. Border security is important. It must be dealt with. But we also have to deal with a dysfunctional healthcare system, and in my view, do what every other major country does, guarantee healthcare to all people as a right. Mr. President, border security is an important issue, but so is the fact that tens of millions of workers in this country are working for starvation wages. I was just in South Carolina the other day, and I talked to a waitress. She receives $2.25 pay plus tips. Millions of workers in this country are working for starvation wages of $8 or $9 or $10 an hour. We have got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, and I'm proud that in the House, I expect they will pass a minimum wage bill of $15 an hour. And, Mr. Chairman, when that bill comes to the Senate, I hope we can do the same. Mr. President, border security is an important issue, but so is the fact that the scientific community tells us that we have a very short window of opportunity to address the global crisis of climate change. What the scientists have told us is that if we do not boldly reduce carbon emissions over the next 12 years by transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, this country, and in fact countries all over the world, will suffer irreparable damage from climate change. We have got to address the crisis of climate change. Border security is important. We have to deal with it. But we also have to deal with climate change. We have to deal with a broken criminal justice system, which today creates a situation where in America we have more people in jail than any other country on earth. And obviously, if we have learned anything in recent weeks, we have got to deal with an immigration system which everybody acknowledges does not work. And we have got to pass comprehensive immigration reform. So, Mr. President, my point is that I hope very much we will not continue to be held hostage by this president who once again, just an hour ago, has threatened another government shutdown in 3 weeks if he doesn't get his way. And I hope very much there will be serious discussions on border security, a very important issue. But President Trump, stop holding the American people hostage. Stop threatening to shut down the government. Stop telling hundreds of thousands of federal employees that they have got to come to work while they don't get paid. Stop denying or threatening to deny the American people access to the vital services that they need. So, Mr. President, today is a good day in the sense that I hope and expect that the government will be reopened. But how sad it is that after all of the suffering, all of the uncertainty that our federal employees have faced, we are back to exactly where we were 5 weeks ago when this body voted unanimously. Every Republican, every Democrat voted unanimously to keep the government open. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I think it is good that we are standing here on the Senate floor and acknowledging that with the news that the President has just announced that the government will reopen as early as today, that those good, dedicated, hardworking federal employees that have either been furloughed or who have been working without pay for now 35 days will be able to get back to work, will be able to receive that just compensation for their work. This is important news. This is good news. This is long-awaited news. In fairness, Mr. President, this never should have happened. I am one, I concur with my colleague from Maine that there's never a good reason to have a government shutdown in the first place. So we've demonstrated that we can do it, but it sure isn't something that should be done, and I think the men and women who have been so directly and immediately impacted are not only relieved this afternoon, but they're saying, for heaven's sakes, Congress, make sure that you don't put us through this again. And count me in that camp of working to make sure that we don't put these men and women and their families through this again. I've been holding Skype sessions with the spouses of our active Coast Guard in Alaska. And last evening, I had an opportunity to connect with the spouses from Sitka. And it is absolutely gut-wrenching to hear a young wife who has an 18-month-old, she's got a baby who's now less than a year old. Her husband has been out at sea for 5 months. He's just come home, and she relays the conversation of the two of them crying in bed as they're discussing whether or not she should leave Sitka to go back and live with either his parents or her parents with their baby because they cannot afford to stay in the Coast Guard community that they are in. I'm scheduled to have yet another Skype session with the spouses of our Coast Guard men and women from Cordova and Petersburg in just 40 minutes from now. I think it's going to be a much better conversation with them than with the spouses from Sitka yesterday, because we'll be able to share the good news. But it was interesting, as I have visited with them, heard their very direct stories. They're pretty selfless. They're pretty selfless in saying, as hard as this is on us, and as much as we want to be paid, we want to make sure that others who serve as public servants are federal employees, whether they are air traffic controllers, whether they are FAA, whether they are TSA, whether they are NOAA, whether they are NIMS, that they too will get paid, because they too are our friends and our neighbors, and they too are hurting. And so, again, making sure that we are doing right by all those who serve our country, who serve all of us through the good work that they do through the agencies. This has been a harsh and a difficult time. And it has been particularly painful for me, coming from a state where we are feeling the direct impacts of this partial shutdown, perhaps more so than any other state out there. I'm told that per capita, there are more federal employees in Alaska who are directly impacted by this partial shutdown than any other state. So I hear the urgency. And it's not just from our Coast Guard men and women. Again, it's so many agencies who have a presence. I got a readout just yesterday from those in the fishing industry who are concerned that because permits can't get issued, because comments can't be published in the Federal Register, that the impact to their fisheries and being able to move forward with the black cod fishery or to move forward with the pot cod, they're not going to be able to do it. So today's news allows for everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. But I don't want them, whether they're a fisherman or whether they're that Coast Guard wife, I don't want them thinking, am I only going to be able to breathe now for 3 weeks? What happens after that? We owe it to not only our federal workers, but we owe it to all America to take the anxiety out of this process. I have supported my colleague, the senator from Ohio, with his legislation that would permanently end government shutdowns. I'm not convinced that the way it's drafted, it's something as an appropriator that I'm entirely good with, but I want us to take this off the table. In fact, I believe it's the presiding officer that used the terminology that a shutdown is like the chemical warfare agent when it comes to political weapons. At the end of the day, Mr. President, these are people's lives that we're dealing with. These are people's lives. When we say we're going to shut the government down for this period of time, well, we try to advance priorities. We cannot mess with people's lives this way. So we've got our work set out for us, and I believe that we will rise to this occasion. We must rise to this occasion. I look forward to doing that. I thank the President for his announcement today. I thank him for giving us this 3 weeks that we requested. I thank the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader for coming together to help advance this. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take the President. It's going to take our leadership. It's going to take all of us working together. And as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I look forward to my continuing role in this, but know that we owe it to the country. We owe it to the country to get this right and get it right quickly. This is a good start today, and I look forward to working with colleagues, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just listening and paying close attention to my colleague from Alaska describing the uselessness, the misery march of a government shutdown, particularly one that's lasted longer than anyone in the history, anyone that has occurred over the history of this country. I couldn't agree more with and associate myself with her comments, having had many conversations, as many of us have, with our TSA agents, our Coast Guard, and yes, West Virginia has a Coast Guard presence. I would like to emphasize that. And others, our prison guards, who are really have had just foisted upon them, through no fault of their own, really some very difficult decisions and some sleepless nights, I'm sure. So while, you want to celebrate, it's really little cause to celebrate. I think it's more a breath of fresh air or a deep breath of sigh of relief or probably in the minds of the veterans that I was with at the Martinsburg Medical Center this morning, probably a deep breath and like, well, no kidding. Let's get back to the business of governing and making decisions and making good decisions for the country. And so I chair the subcommittee on Homeland Security in the Senate as part of the Appropriations Committee. I'm very pleased that the President has made this announcement, that both of our leaders here, both Senator McConnell and Senator Schumer, have come together with a common sense, breathable solution to give us some space to work through what we call here regular order. For those people listening that don't really understand what that is, that's what we should be doing every day, where I sit down as the chair of the committee with Senator Tester from Montana, who's the ranking member of the committee, and other members of the committee, and we work things out. I want this, he wants this. Well, maybe you pick in the middle, or maybe I'll give you this if you give me that. And so I look forward with the bold leadership of Senator Shelby and Senator Leahy as chair and ranking member on the full committee, and the leadership certainly of our leaders with the President to working out a good solution here. I firmly believe that border security is important. That is reflected in the bill that we passed out of our subcommittee that the chair voted on and the senator from Tennessee both voted on in the full committee. We had 10 Democrats that voted for that bill, which had border security, a pedestrian fence or a wall. It had technology. It had a polar security cutter for our Coast Guard, which is something very important to Alaska and to us, the Arctic, and to us as Americans for our safety. Has a lot of very reflective priorities in there for the rest of the country. So we can't lose sight that Homeland Security is more about one structure or one placement of a structure. It's about a full-out array of ways of looking at protecting our country internally, in our transportation sector, in our energy sectors, and others. So while it sounds like a steep mountain, I embrace this. I embrace the ability to play a role, to find a reasonable solution that we've been granted until February the 15th to work this out. And so with that, Madam President, I'm rolling up my sleeves. I'm getting ready to go to work with many, many others here in this body and across the way and at the White House. And to the American people, I agree, shutdowns are useless, they're painful, nobody wins. The big discussion was, who's winning here? Well, it's pretty clear the American people aren't winning, and in the end, I don't think anybody wins. So with that, I would yield my time and look forward to getting to work and finding the right solution. Thank you.
The senator from Tennessee.
Madam President, I'm glad the senator from West Virginia is on the floor, because if someone were to ask, where do we go from here, her work is the best example of that. Let's stop and think about this just a minute. The issue is whether we should include in a plan for border security some physical barrier. That's the issue. How do you resolve that issue? That's what we do. I remember I went to see Johnny Cash when I was governor of Tennessee, and I didn't know quite what to say to him. So I said, how many nights are you on the road? And he said, about 200. And I said, why do you do that? And he looked at me and said, That's what I do. You know, well, this is what we do. I mean, our job is not to take a position or to make a speech. We could do that at home. We could get a radio program or a television show. No one might watch it, but we could get one. It takes very little courage and very little skill to take a position or make a speech. But what the senator from West Virginia has shown that she's able to do is to take issues of border security and do what we're supposed to do, which is to put different views together and get a result. Now, this wasn't that long ago, what she just described. It was last summer that the full Appropriations Committee of the United States Senate, which is about a third of all of us, almost equally divided, Republicans and Democrats, considered President Trump's budget request for border security. It included a request that included physical barriers, a wall. And what was the result? If I've got my numbers right, I believe the committee recommended about $5.7 billion for border security, including $1.6 billion for a physical barrier, which is a wall. Okay, at least 10 Democrats voted for that. You didn't read about that in the afternoon news as a big problem because we considered what a comprehensive border security plan would be for our southern border under the leadership of the senator from West Virginia. And she responded to the president's request. He is, after all, the president. I've read the Constitution. He does have to sign the bill for it to become a law. So we respected the president's request, considered it, and voted for it. And that's where we were on the Senate floor as late as last summer. Now, then the president came along more recently and said, we have a crisis on the southern border. We need more money for border security. And part of that money ought to include physical barriers. That should surprise no one. The last 4 presidents have said the same thing. President Obama, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, President George H.W. Bush. We think they were pretty effective presidents. They all asked for money to build physical barriers on the southern border of the United States. It's 1,954 miles long. Under those 4 presidents who came before President Trump, those presidents asked for, and Congress approved, Democrats and Republicans, 654 miles of wall along the southern border. So, Madam President, this issue has gotten blown way out of proportion. As the president just said a few moments ago, he's not asking for a wall from sea to shining sea. And what this Congress has shown under 4 presidents of the United States, and more recently under the leadership of the senator from West Virginia, is that we can take a president's request, either a Republican president or a Democrat president, in the case of Clinton and Obama, we can take their requests for border security and come up with a comprehensive recommendation that attracts the bipartisan support of United States senators and make it a law. And that's what we should do in the next 3 weeks. Boy Scouts shouldn't get a merit badge for telling the truth, and United States senators and presidents shouldn't get a merit badge for keeping the government open. That's what we are supposed to do. But it is good that it is opened, and it's important for the people to know that we know what to do with it. We know what to do with it because we do it all the time. There are 2 things wrong with the last few weeks. One is that the government was shut down. And as the senator from Alaska said, as the senator from West Virginia said, as I've heard almost every senator say on both sides of the aisle, we should never, ever shut down the government. Shutting down the government should be as off limits in budget negotiations as chemical warfare is in real warfare. I should not be able to say to the senator from Alaska, if I don't get my way, I'm going to shut the government down. Whether it's on Planned Parenthood, or military spending, or road in Alaska, or a road in Tennessee, or a coal mine in West Virginia. We have our strong opinions, but we don't say, we're going to take our football and go home. We're going to say, we were elected to make the government work for taxpayers, not to shut it down. And we know how to do that. We know how to do that.
She's on her way. Pelosi's
Hey, Victor, you want to take Decon's position?
Yeah, but well, I went up yesterday. It was like spotless. Because it was like in that corner, like facing out. Something that's not. That's the first thing. It's not you. You do. Because Jeff we have an issue with all the wiring that's here. Now we have an issue with it. There's a bunch of people with all the electricity that's over here. No issue because it's
First and foremost.
I think the emails are all slow. They're all over the practice. Yep. I sent emails.
She's coming up now, right?
She just has the word. I was like,
Okay.
we could go outside.
All right, we'll go see ya. Thanks for coming in today.
Pleasure.
It's always good to see you. Oh, your camera I put over by my stuff.
We already know that, so. Hey, Vonna, turn the box, actually, you need to make sure. Put it in. All right, you'll come off my. Yeah, for the selection.
Good.
The other camera for the top shelf. My camera, the door for your question. Yeah, but we just need to check that. Something like that. You hear? No. What cap did you put him in?
Right.
Put him in cap two, you're A2. No, the IFB put in cap two.
It doesn't.
Dick might not put it. For your live shot.
Oh my God, I can't see a thing.
I don't have any questions. Mom, thanks. You don't have to worry.
Mic check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Microphone check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Mic check.
Mic check, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, yakety yak, 1, 2, 3, mic check, 1, 2, 3. Victor, you good? Keep on going. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
A full out play. That's what he said.
What did you eat today?
Too intimidating. My grandma.
Just making sure they haven't directly contacted you, which they did. Yeah. I feel better. I mean, I know you don't need to be babysat, but like, it's part of my job to make sure I know where you are.
Here, Vic. Podium, podium. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do they have it? Check, check, check. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Podium. Podium. You off mic?
Arcs and then sparks on some of that particle board. Fabric.
Mic check, mic check. Antonio, Victor. Mic check. Mic check. You're getting it? Great.
Kelly, are you on? Kelly, is the mic on?
Yeah. Yes, oh, is the mic on? Nancy, talk to me. Can you go back here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, thank you.
Perfect. I'm not getting it.
Okay.
Mic check, mic check.
That good?
Mic check, mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Is that really a rule, or you just, that's my rule when it comes to suits. As I don't wear a suit if they're not broke.
If they wanted, hypothetically, if they were like, hey, we want to take Kelly Live real quick.
Right.
Do you have an ID like set up for it?
She would use her like normal, right?
Well, she doesn't have like the.
Yeah, she can use my phone and I can, absolutely, yeah.
It's supposed to be now. There.
32?
The 29 doesn't look good. So, Ryan, he's been here for like 2 months straight now. Besides the rock. Did he? Yeah, that can't be. Maybe he's deciding he's like, oh no. He called back and said where. Oh yeah, he had some. Is he?
No, not for sure.
Would you say travel? Travel? Not sure. The night under cover of a. So just we'll just shoot like live here. There is the things that.
That's for,
I know, but they'll marry your video with the sound. That's fine.
That was the next thing to go. Is like the,
We're walking over from Mr. Schumer's office now, so in about 2 minutes we'll get started.
Thank you.
Who's good? 2 minutes. Okay. Thank you.
To the light, to the light. There we go.
Well, good afternoon. First, I am proud that this is the first time this year that Leader Pelosi is appearing as Speaker Pelosi in this room. And the longest shutdown in American history will finally end today. The President has agreed to our request to open the government and then debate border security, which is great news for 800,000 federal workers and millions of Americans who depend on government services. As Democrats have said all along, the solution to this impasse was separate funding for the government and then go over our disagreements from border security. Separate the funding of government from the discussion on border security, and that's what we got. And Democrats in the Senate and in the House were united behind this position throughout the shutdown, and ultimately this agreement endorses our position. It reopens the government without preconditions, gives Democrats and Republicans an opportunity to discuss border security without holding hundreds of thousands of American workers hostage. We expect the continuing resolution to clear the Senate and clear the House this afternoon and be signed by the President today. And before I go on, I think on both of us, but we want to thank all the federal workers from the bottom of our hearts. They've worked so selflessly this past month without pay, showing up to do a job they knew was important, but for which they weren't fairly compensated. The workers showed up despite the callous indifference of the administration, who treated them as hostages, who treated them as pawns, who belittled their financial strain. Our dedicated public servants should never, never have to go through this again. We will do everything we can to make sure they won't have to. And this past month has proven just how vital government services are to the American people, whether it's our food safety, our airports, our national parks, our economy, our national security, and so much else. The American people do not like it when you throw a wrench into the lives of government workers over an unrelated political dispute. Working people throughout America empathized with the federal workers and were aghast at what the president was doing to them. Hopefully now the president has learned his lesson. Now, once the president signs the continuing resolution, we in Congress will roll up our sleeves and try to find some agreement on border security. We don't agree on some of the specifics of border security. Democrats are firmly against the wall. But we agree on many things, such as the need for drug inspection technology, humanitarian aid, strengthening security at our ports of entry. And that bodes well for finding an eventual agreement, the fact that we have so many areas where we can agree. But today, the President will sign the bill to reopen the government along the outlines of what we have proposed. And hopefully, it means a lesson learned for the White House and for many of our Republican colleagues. Shutting down the government over a policy difference is self-defeating. It accomplishes nothing but pain and suffering for the country and incurs an enormous political cost to the party shutting it down. We cannot ever hold American workers hostage again. Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader, and thank you for your leadership in bringing us to this important resolution now, where shortly the Senate will send over to the House the paper. I came over to see the original paper, and we'll get it probably in a half an hour. Two resolutions, one to open up government for all of the agencies of government, and one to proceed to conference on the Homeland Security bill. We're pleased that we reached an agreement to reopen government now so that we can have a discussion on how to secure our borders. It is very clear that we all understand the importance of securing our borders, and we have some very good ideas on how to do that. Part of the discussion as we go forward. House Democrats look forward to working in a bipartisan, bicameral way to pass all of the bills to open government as we proceed into the conference discussion. Now I'm an appropriator, and I was forged in that culture, and I know, left to their own devices, that the appropriators bicamerally and bipartisanly can come to conclusion. Again, sometimes it comes to the four principles of the leaders of the House and Senate to weigh in, and I think that we will have a very productive time in a short period of time to come to some conclusion. We're grateful, inspired by the courage and the determination of America's workers. They have shown during this crisis such strong character. But nonetheless, they have to pay the bills when they come due, whether it's a rent check, paying their mortgage, their credit card bills, their car payment, the list goes on. Some of them didn't even have gas money because they didn't have cash or any more line of credit card ability to put gas in the car to go to work. It's really hard for some in the administration to understand how people live paycheck to paycheck and how marginal some of their existences are. Makes a difference in how they educate their children, how they put food on the table, again, how they pay the rent, etc. So we thank them and are so glad that, as the President said earlier, as soon as possible or immediately. So I don't know which is faster, but the quickest of the two they will receive their back pay and the pay that is due today. We're grateful to Democrats on both sides of the Capitol for their unity that was very, very important in these discussions. It's sad, though, that it's taken this long to come to an obvious conclusion. Talked about missed bills and financial security being shaken, sometimes questioning, putting in question the credit, how people's credit is viewed. And that's particularly problematic for our veterans, many of whom are in their jobs with security clearances. And a security clearance is affected if your credit rating is diminished. So we are grateful to our veterans who have donned the uniform of our country to protect us and then moved on to the civilian side to continue their public service. And we want them to have all the respect they deserve, as well as our other public employees, federal employees, who are working so hard to meet the needs of the American people. We value their purpose. We appreciate their diligence in performing their jobs, whether, as the leader said, keeping us safe, and in terms of civilian aviation, whether it's the FBI, other areas of public safety, but also just in so many ways, whether it's food safety and the rest. The list goes on. You're familiar with it. But we don't want in any way any shutdown of government to diminish the respect that we have for the purpose of our public employees and the excellence of their service. Disagreement in policy should never be a reason to shut down government, really shouldn't, especially, again, for a period of time that has an impact on the paychecks. I'm sad it has taken this long. I'm glad that we've come to a conclusion today as to how we go forward in the next 3 weeks. And again, I salute the minority, the Democratic leader in the Senate, for the work that he did to bring this. Because in the House we passed 10, but sometimes we passed the bill. Working with our leadership, Mr. Hoyer, 10 times he brought bills to the floor to open up government. To open up government. And the most recent one that was presented on the Senate floor yesterday was so simple. $12 billion for disaster assistance and open up government for 2 weeks. The Republicans said no. I think the public weighed in. And I quote Lincoln all the time, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. And we thank the public for weighing in so strongly, for paying attention. And I think that will be the success of this conference. Again, as an appropriator, I participated in many conferences when we used to have them. This conference, that the public awareness is so increased and the public interest in it is so sharpened that they will see what the decisions are that we have to make and help weigh in on those decisions. I thank you again.
Okay, wait, one at a time. Come on, one at a time, please.
Speaker, the president has wanted this wall funding for a long time, but it wasn't until Democrats won the House that he really went to the mat for it. How much of all of this do you think is about the new power dynamic and his desire to show you who's really in charge?
I don't get your question. I mean, the point is, today we have come to a way to go forward to debate the best ways to protect our border. I don't see this as any power play.
I'm referring to the past 36 days and the fact that he held out over wall funding.
Well, if you're saying that the president held out over wall funding to show who was in charge, I think that's quite a bad statement to make about any leader in our country. But what I do say is, let's go forward, get this done. The leader mentioned lessons learned, and hope that the people know that we cannot hold our public employees hostage because we have a disagreement. For how many, 34 days, is it now? Over 1 month, having an impact on their lives. So I don't want to make any characterizations of the president's motivation. You'll have to ask him.
Go ahead.
Speaker Pelosi, did the president underestimate you politically? And can you assure the public that there won't be another impasse in 3 weeks?
I can't assure the public on anything that the president will do, but I do have to say I'm optimistic. I see every challenge or every crisis as an opportunity to do the right thing for the American people, and at the same time make people aware of what the decisions are that we have here, and hopefully that will make everybody come together in a way that is unifying for our country. I can't characterize the president's evaluation of me.
I just say one more thing in reference to that. I suggested to Leader McConnell that we use a conference committee format. That conference committee has Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, sitting at a table, has worked very successfully on Homeland Security and everything and all the other bills that haven't been signed over the last several years, even when the Republicans were in charge. And so I'm very optimistic that the conference committee can come to a good conclusion and we can avoid another shutdown.
The State of the Union
Go ahead,
go on its plan.
Cheryl.
The State of the Union go on its plan now.
The State of the Union is not planned now. I get that. What I'd said to the president is when government is open, we will discuss a mutually agreeable date. And I'll look forward to doing that and welcoming the president to the House of Representatives for the State of the Union when we agree on that mutual agreeable date.
This morning you were planning to announce a border security vision of Democrats, what you want. What is the state of that proposal, the status of it? And also, can you accept any sort of physical barrier in a border security plan?
The work of the conference committee will draw out everyone's view of what is the best way to protect our borders. Our chair of our Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security, Congresswoman Lucille Rohrabach-Allard, knows this issue very well. She will go to the table with our best ideas on how to protect our border. The leader referenced some in terms of infrastructure that relates to our ports of entry. The president talks about drugs coming into our country. 90% of the drugs come through the ports of entry. They don't come one way or another, as he was describing. They come through our ports of entry. So let us increase the infrastructure where the drugs are coming in. Let us increase, as the leader said, the technology to scan for that, for drugs, guns, other contraband, and arrest. Let us talk about some of the things we have in common with the president in terms of humanitarian assistance for those coming over. But we're not having a conference committee right now. We'll leave it up to our appropriators to come to that. But some of the things we were going to discuss were where we think, where we have evidence-based knowledge about how we best secure our borders.
Last one. Go ahead.
Do you think that, as someone who was in these negotiations, do you think the president underestimated the speaker? And do you think that he thought he could get what he wanted?
I think he thought no one should ever underestimate the speaker, as Donald Trump has learned. But in addition to that, and I think Nancy would be the first, our Democrats stayed totally unified. Certainly in the Senate, they made many attempts to take some of our Democrats and get them to side with them. And the unity of our two caucuses really worked, because I believe the president himself believed and was told by a couple of his advisors, you've written about them, that, just hold out and we'll get the Democrats to crack and join us. In the Senate, more relevant than the House because they have the majority, he was unable to do that. And I think after 3 weeks, as the toll mounted and it became clear, we helped make it clear to the president, to the public, that the president was the one in charge of the shutdown, that he just, he knew that it was a lost cause. Thank you. You want to go?
Clear on your position. Are you no longer ruling out any money for the wall? Are you now, open to money?
Have I not been clear on the wall? Okay. No, I have been very clear on the wall. Yeah, I've been very clear. But let me just go to the previous question and say this and associate myself with the remarks of the leader. In our caucus, the beauty of it is the mix. And I always say, when people say to me, oh, you're so good at organizing your caucus. No, I don't unify our caucus. Our values unify us. And I'm sure it's the same in the Senate. And the fact is that our diversity is our strength, the differences of, in so many different ways, including differences of opinion. That's our strength, but our unity is our power. And that is what maybe the president underestimated.
Thank you, everybody.
Are you open to money for the wall now?
Do you want anything from the Dreamers in this conference?
And we'll be shut down over a national emergency. Thanks for coming in today. I tried. It was a struggle. Did they send you the stuff like the Super Bowl?
Your question is I should have gotten into it that way. I was trying to get to it. You hit it, and then I just moved it over.
I don't know what it was. No one's calling me. Thank you. Just leave it in secret. Oh, sure. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Bring your camera. I have to go set up.
Okay, see everybody for Valentine's Day. If not before. I've enjoyed it, I gotta tell you.